So we're going to get going here. We're going to talk about the new models of schooling. So part of the work of the EduJedi Leadership Society is the work of looking at models, looking at definitions, looking at instructional design model, and looking at what we call the new EduJedi experience standards. So those are going to be later meetings. This one is really going to be about the new models of schooling. So let me just start off with the two of you, waiting on Tom to join us. But you know, the model of how you're delivering right now is a patchwork quilt across the United States. You know, some places are going to be fully back, like most of Texas. Other places are like, well, we don't really know. You know, we might have to be back to everyone from home, or we might have to have sort of a split model. So I'm going to be going through the 8 models that we identified as a research institute and sort of walking you guys through them too, so we can comment along the way. But where are you each at right now, right? Like in terms of the model for delivering to your students. Anne, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Well, you know, our primary mode of instruction at this moment at 2:08 p.m. on August the 9th is, of course, face-to-face, in-person instruction. So direct instruction in person is kind of the way we're approaching instruction at this moment. We are only 4 days in, so today is day 4. We do have a growing number of students who are all virtual, so they are receiving instruction asynchronous for part of the time and then synchronous for part of the time, just based on how their schedule is worked out based on the grade level, primarily. So that's where we are at the moment.
All right. Okay, so Maurice, I'm calling on you. What's your model right now?
I had to laugh at what was just shared, because I literally sent an email on Friday that included a time and date stamp that had to do about our model. So I really had to chuckle at that, because it just shows how we're all kind of going through the same thing. Here in Orange County Public Schools, using the same kind of format as before that was said about the time and date stamp, we have our official first day of school tomorrow. And so for the official first day of school, we are back pretty much 100% face-to-face. And so while last year we had more of like a hybrid flex model happening, this year we are pretty much back face-to-face, and we have our traditional virtual school, Orange County Virtual, that students can also attend. We are anticipating, however, that depending on how things go, that we may have to make some adjustments fairly quickly.
Okay. Yes, understood. All right. So Doug, let me know when Dr. Palmer arrives. So before I get into the 8 models and we kind of go into details, sort of what's bubbling out there nationally, I want to call on Kelley. Is it Kelley Murtagh? Kelley's new to me. I know Wendy really well. But Kelley, are you here?
I am. Hi, it is Kelley Murtagh. I'm here. I'm here with Wendy.
Okay, great. Perfect. All right. So want to have you two sort of share sort of from Edison's viewpoint what's happening on the front lines of the direct online learning scene. So giving you guys a couple minutes before we go into the full working mode, to just sort of introduce Edison, because I know you guys underwrote this whole series of events and we want to hear from you, and then Wendy and Kelley have you stay on and be part of the conversation. So do you want to screen share? I think Doug can pass you screen for a second.
Yeah, I think we were planning on screen sharing a little bit later, LeiLani, or do you want us to do that right now as an intro?
Well, whenever you want to. I think maybe it might be better if we went through the 8 models first and then have you. Okay, let's do that. All right, so now that I have you on, and then Doug's going to let me know when we get Dr. Palmer on too. Okay, so let's talk about these models and what's really happening. This came out in our Learning Leadership versus Systemic Inequities. Anne, did you get to download a copy of that, and Maurice? Anne first?
Oh, I did, yes.
Okay. And Maurice, I'm assuming you did too, because you were already talking high flex, so you're in the know.
You get the full copy, but I've been looking and researching about it in preparation for this.
Okay, good. Perfect. All right. So number one model is what used to be digital traditional, but now it's all alt schedule. I think this is a really important part of the conversation, because essentially what this comes down to is that time has forced a logistics sophistication that most schools and districts in America are not ready for. So they sit there with their pacing guides, they stick them into, PDFs, and then spreadsheets and other documents. And then those sit in isolation. Then over here's their scheduling calendar. And then that's taken a wild turn with AB days, AB weeks, other sorts of things going on. So then your ability to go, what are we doing if, this kid is going to be here only Mondays and Wednesdays, and then these kids over here, and we've got cohorts syncing through. There's the alternate schedule from the old Carnegie unit, you're in for the full day all week, is really making things nuts for people. So I'd like you guys to comment on that, because we think that the old traditional has gone, but there is still digital traditional with an alt schedule. What are you seeing? You first, Anne.
So I certainly see that even during last spring, I can't say the previous spring, I can't say spring of 20, but certainly spring of 21, we saw a number of models. And I would suggest that as we started to bring students in on hybrid, we saw more opportunities to modify our traditional thinking about how we serve students and the schedule. So we had a little bit of a different schedule last year. We had a 3-2 model, which meant some days the kids were there for 3 days a week, and then on digital 2 days fully. And then we had the reverse, meaning we had 2 groups of kids. And that probably allowed us to think differently about hybrid, because the first model of hybrid we had was 2 days on and 3 days off for everybody, and 100% digital the entire time. But it was really cool when we did the 3-2 alternating, because we gave kids more time in person, which is what they wanted. But we also ensured that students felt comfortable with digital more often for a sustained period of time. So it may not make sense the way I'm explaining it, but certainly the idea, the concept of looking at a different way to approach digital learning and traditional was introduced. And lots of people said, oh, this isn't going to work because the kids will get confused. Well, I maintained the position and continue to advance it that the kids really understand it. It's the adults that are often more confused by any kind of alternate schedule. And I do believe that we're finding more and more a need for us to have a more integrated approach to the use of our digital tools. And we are going to see some overlapping, as we should. That's how it works in my life. It all overlaps.
Yeah. And so the alt schedule is really real for you. And you've seen that change. Let me come back to you, Anne, on logistics. I'm going to go to Maurice, and then hi, Tom, I'm coming to you next.
Hello.
So Maurice, your thoughts on the alt schedule world of logistics and everything changing?
Yeah, I definitely think that one of the things that we've seen from the pandemic is just some of the opportunities that are out there, but again, some of the challenges that are there with the systems that we have in place to kind of bring everything to fruition. I was writing down some notes about some of the things that we saw this year. We know that the flexibility that was there for some folks was really seen as a benefit. I remember I was talking with a teacher, and they said that they had a child who had a parent that was not well, and just from other health things going on. And there were times where that parent was in the hospital, and that child before would have just been with that parent in the hospital and completely missed school. And instead, they were able to join virtually, and they were able to still take part and to be able to successfully take part in the in classes. And so having that flexibility was awesome for that child. I had another teacher that mentioned how they teach freshmen, and sometimes the hardest thing freshmen have is just waking up that early in the morning at that 7 o'clock time period. And he said, the amount of ninth graders that were able to make first period and not have that loss there was huge. And then a third point I'll just make real quick, and these are more anecdotes I know overall, but with our arts education during the pandemic, our centralized art team here did a really great job of bringing in virtually for our arts classes, professionals from Broadway, professionals from the arts community to provide example instruction for our students. I know that we have several schools that are starting to dip their toes, and the way they're dipping their toe is with our virtual school. So we have an Orange County virtual school, and there are some schools that are looking and they're providing students an opportunity to take one of their courses through Orange County virtual, even though they are staying enrolled inside of the brick and mortar school. It's not all the way there yet because, they're taking that class, but they are still physically in the school. They're just kind of going to a room with their computer and they have an aide or someone else in there. But it's folks are trying to figure out the edges of how to make this work because there's still systemic challenges for sure.
Yeah, that sounds like that part was one of our later models. Cool. That's cool. All right. So, Dr. Palmer, Tom, can I just call you Tom?
Tom, it's fine.
Hey, good to see you again.
Good seeing you.
Yeah, so so this is sort of a working meeting about the models that are out there, and we're starting with this one.
Mhm.
Can you tell us first kind of where you're at right now in your district?
Okay, where we physically are, where we are from a digital.
From a model viewpoint.
Okay. We're all over the place. I think Maurice kind of hit it the best. Is it just as we were thrown into this. We went with a hybrid model. Elementary school started, and then as we learned more about the pandemic and what was going on, we were able to bring our elementary kids back full. But our high school was working on a 2-day model with a A-B schedule. AA was on Mondays and Tuesdays, and the kids went 2 days a week in the BB model, and then Wednesdays was a remote instructional day. And as we progressed through the course of the school year, we went to a 3-2 or a 5 out of 10 day cycle. So we had kids 1 week go 3 days, AB Monday through Wednesday. The following week, the kids would come in Wednesday through Friday. The model worked okay, but the thing is, I think the hardest thing it was to lead through this time was teaching teachers to teach outside the bricks and mortar. The way you construct classrooms inside the bricks and mortar is not the way you do it digitally. I talked heavily, wrote about it a lot throughout my district. We talked about the high school that works model, which I thought was a pretty strong model all along about rigor, relevance, and relationships. And I think it transferred that relationship piece to be the most important part about this educational process, because if you didn't draw relationships with the kids, they weren't interested in following you any other time, and you did not have them in a physical space like a classroom, but you had them in digital world. So being digitally, you had to work more on the premise of building strong relationships with kids and making the information relevant to their lives. So
yeah, we could talk about that part for like a day, 24 hours at least, because I think that part went missing until people recognized, and not everyone did. Because when you go digital, it's a whole different ballgame on driving the relationship. It almost has to be like a piece of the curriculum. First, do this, you know?
You're right. That's huge, and that's what we learned through the whole process. Was that more than anything else? Teachers struggled sometimes because of lack of attendance, participation in the program. Teachers that thrived would have thrived either way, whether it was inside the classroom or digital, because of you could say charisma, but also strong teaching skills and the ability with their relationships to draw connections with kids.
I'd like to add, LeiLani, as Chief Learning Officer of a company of EdisonLearning, where we develop curriculum, we have a teaching staff that implements, and we partner with districts to implement the curriculum that we build. That fidelity of implementation that you just described, Tom, is so important. And you know, you can't just one and done and do a quick training and say, well, here you go. And so I think it is so critical and so important that anytime you work with a partner, if it's EdisonLearning or if it's anyone else, that training is so important with those teachers, because it is a completely different pedagogy. And I'm excited to hear all the different ways that you're describing that you all used the digital curriculum. And LeiLani, that's why I wanted to wait and mention what we do, because Kelley is going to show some different implementations, and you're describing a lot of them now, because depending on who you partner with, you can have a product where your teachers actually use the product and implement it in classrooms, or you know, your partner's teachers can use it. But it sounds like you guys are doing some really neat things.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. And I think we could go a little deeper into that, because the next thing I really wanted to do, and we'll just mention the blended flips model. I just put that one on the screen, but I want to come back to Anne and Maurice and Tom, and back to you, Wendy, that before I'm going to put you guys on deck to give us that full thing, Wendy, at the end of the 8 models. But I think it makes sense they're the most in this particular event. But the logistics, the like Wendy was saying and Tom was saying about how you get teachers to do things, I think what we're looking at as an underlying theme here in all the models is pretty much all curriculum now is going to be digital from forever, in order to be that flexibility thing. So I want to come back to the logistics conversation on model 1 and here model 2, which is flipped, which forces teachers to redo lesson plans so that the homework is distinctly different than the togetherness time, which is a key part of going digital. So logistically, that's a different ball game than they were used to, and when everything was face-to-face. So Anne, I'm going to come back to you on logistics. How did you lead, and what are your key points in the alt schedule or even doing the blended flipped thing?
Well, the blended flip thing is actually what I say blended flip thing. You know, in order for us to really serve our staff well, we had to use the blended model, because there was no, I've got 3,500 teachers. So for me to offer professional learning for them, I couldn't use the traditional model where we get together, we get to, you know, get to know each other, and then we get to introduce content, and then we get to soak it in, and then we get to ask questions and test our learning. What we ended up having to do, and we were doing that in some ways prior to all of this, was we ended up, even with our meetings, providing the information in advance so people could review it, take a look at it, and then we started from there when we actually came together. Because spending an enormous amount of time sitting in front of the computer was not desirable, and it really did allow people to take time in advance to review the information. For example, if there was any content or any information I wanted them to review in advance, I would send it to them with some guiding questions, and then give them an opportunity to explore that information once we got online, or to work with a buddy in order to do it, which was really a good model for them when it came to their own students. So they had that experience, and then they replicated that experience with their kids. Now, of course, you can't do that with all grade levels. You can't do it with all topics, with all content. But where they could, they did. And so we did it with them, with meetings, then professional learning, and then gave them an opportunity to do that same thing with students.
That's really great. So you lived it on the teaching, on the professional learning side, which makes it easier for people to understand how they're going to use it themselves.
Correct.
Because they're living it.
Right.
Which is awesome, Anne. So, Maurice, I think you already mentioned some things on the logistics of all this. Anything else you want to say about the logistics?
I think, logistics that can be such a rich conversation around all of this. I think one of the things that we tried to do, separate of looking at schedules, is just look at some of the equipment that we were providing teachers to help them, especially when they're doing video conferencing. In our district, for example, we purchased swivel devices for teachers to use, so that if they had a situation where they were either trying to record for a blended or flip instruction, or they were having to do something where they were doing a hybrid type instruction, that they could have those devices to help with just the management of trying to both teach students in front of you, as well as instructing students who are online. And what I think about too with this is, when I think about some of the implementation of this, I think a lot of our teachers, they did flip in the traditional sense of saying that, you're going to take this and you're going to have this opportunity to look at it at home. But I did see where a lot of folks started doing virtual office hours, where they were able to assist students either in a one-on-one setting or in a group setting, to help or provide some additional practice for them to help them get things outside the school day that they would not have traditionally gotten.
Is there guidance that you guys put around that? Because I had superintendents telling me early on they had to tell teachers, no, you can't have office hours from like 7 to 9 p.m. Like, that's a little weird. So.
Well, we did have to tell people we want you to have office hours. We did have to tell people that. Unfortunately, you have to say that to some people. And then we also gave them some parameters, so that there would be an opportunity for them to disconnect, but also it would establish some expectation on parents' part about when teachers might be available. So yes, we had to provide guidance. Yes, we did.
Yeah. How about you, Maurice? Did you have to provide guidance too?
So what we ended up doing from the OCPS side is we did work with several schools to provide a structure for providing support. We had some schools where we knew that we wanted to really concentrate on what support could look like. And so we worked, for example, with another department inside of our district, where we actually build like a template for them. We built a whole piece where they could just go in and plug in the video conferencing link, and then they could set times inside of there, So we did provide some guidance in that sense. That was more of like, as I said, something we did with several schools. I know there were other schools outside of that where a teacher just kind of said, I'll help you if you need help. But that's where we tried to provide some guidance.
Okay, but not really fully top down. All thou shalt do this kind of a thing.
No, it wasn't fully top down as far as that interaction point there. No.
Okay, so Tom, how about you? What is your take on this whole logistics side of the conversation?
Well, as my colleagues also said, it's not that easy. We actually I had a very giving staff, but not nearly the size that Ann said about 3,500 teachers. But anyway, the logistics piece of us was because of the K2, the early level learners. A lot of parents need to heavily support to use the technology. So a lot of my teachers end up working in the evenings with them. We actually had set guidance because they were working up to 11 p.m.
Yeah.
You know, but we encouraged our teachers because of that relationship piece was so huge, for the fact that you were trying to develop relationship, and what I call also making deposits with your families to make sure they know that we're vested, because there were certain times I had to close a couple of times because we didn't have enough staff.
Yeah.
You know, I literally had to close. I had enough substitutes to actually open the district up. So, you know, by building the capacity when you could also helped. And as you're talking logistically, my elementary did by far the best job. The middle and high school, they still fell very hard into that bricks and mortar setting, and hard to get out of that creative piece about flipped classrooms and using technology in that way. So my upper level teachers, yeah, with the AP courses, but traditional run-of-the-mill courses, regular educational for students, made it a little more difficult to do something more creative.
Yeah, this whole issue of the help side of the coin, you know. Wendy, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know in the industry, just looking at chatbots and best practice in that, they're like normally 24/7, but it's not the same teacher. It's like a help desk sort of a thing sometimes. Can you just mention that a little bit? I know we still haven't heard from you fully, but can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And that it's interesting too, because as we roll into this year, I just had a conversation with a gentleman that runs a state program, and it's not that they're getting requests so much for seats for students in their state virtual school. It's that they're, because of the teacher shortage, they're getting people that are reaching out saying we need teachers. So I found that comment really interesting when you said that, Tom. But there's, you know, such a need for teachers, and there are ways to, you can never replace a teacher, but there are ways to answer some of those quick and immediate questions. And, you know, at Edison Learning, we're fortunate to have the advanced technology to have chatbots to help with some of those frequently asked questions, because that's how you train them, so that students can get responses within, you know, immediately. And then we have, you know, help desks with tutors, and those help desks can answer very immediate, very specific, personalized questions. And then we also have teachers with virtual office hours, and that those teachers are then available for response to intervention and questions around that. And that's also, you know, we have a lot of resources like that. But then other groups in the industry, you know, they also have maybe a help desk with graduate assistants to help students. That's just an area where we choose to focus. Yeah,
and I feel like as you're talking about that, Wendy, in my mind, I'm seeing now like education is almost going to have to become like a matrix.
Yeah,
a little bit like Maurice was talking about earlier, where there's been like these experts, you know, well-known artists and things that have sort of matrixed in via probably Zoom meetups, and all of a sudden you start to see that maybe it's not your brick and mortar, you're not confined to your own resources. There's this unlimited pile out here somewhere else, you know, and that's a change in thinking about how you run a school. Not that you want to give up your human teachers as their direct relationship, but where you can plug and play in the matrix becomes obviously an important part of what you have to think with. Tom, it sounds to me like you're having to think that way already because you've already had shortages.
Yeah, it makes it very difficult when you don't have enough. And, you know, the thing is, when you're talking about social distancing, how many kids you can get, so many square feet for classrooms, creates limitations. So you have to do some things outside the box as far as creativity.
LeiLani, I think you're the one that told me the parent expectation is so different in the market now because they have commercial expectations, and that's very different.
Yeah, the commercial, we saw almost a $2 billion uptick in consumer purchase just at the start of March 2020 through the next quarter. Every parent in America was shopping for a math app this, a language app that. What about online schools? I mean, most of the online schools are just gangbusters growth, 1,000% growth and that kind of thing, because, you know, parents have figured out, and they're having an expectation of that, you know, 24/7. I can take a class anytime I want. What schedule? Why isn't it completely flexible? Yeah, so I want to move on to these other models and talk about some of these. So as we all know, competency-based contemporary is a lot of what the really small schools are doing, and this is getting a lot of traction now with the homeschooler world, because competency-based, you know, and not everybody wants to be competency-based because it's hard keeping everybody in a whole group pattern when you're doing it that way. So this is really something that small schools do, and you know, they have to, because maybe they only have 2 teachers. It's a small private school. And so everybody's on their own little checklist of what they have to read and do. And there's really no lecturing. There's just sort of checking the kids out on each of the things they learn. So that's a smaller one model, but I'm mentioning it as a popular model now because it is getting a lot of traction in the consumer world. Then there's the hybrid logistics, contemporary model. This one is the model where the student is generally in a homeroom all the time until they hit a point that is a class. So that's, I want to get into that model a little bit more, but the hybrid logistics contemporary model is the Uberization of learning for cohort-based pace. Stop me if you don't understand that yet. Fully online contemporary, we're familiar with that. That's sort of what Wendy is representing. Kids moving at their own pace, or they enter a class starts, class ends, still traditional timing, or they can be completely self-paced, sort of enroll anytime, end anytime kind of a thing. This is really popular with the homeschool market right now. Hybrid simultaneous is what a lot of schools were doing when they were having teachers. Maurice, when you said you bought swivels for teachers, this is teacher on camera plus kids in front of you model. And it's very hard. And a lot of teachers are balking at that because when you're on camera, your behavior tends to shift. Kids' behaviors tend to shift. And also running 2 audiences at the same time isn't really a human easy thing to do. So we have like little tips and tricks of like deputize one of your online kids to watch other kids and deputize one of your in-class kids so you don't miss a hand raised or a comment kind of a thing. And then that hybrid logistics contemporary, a little bit more about that one, is the logistics completely change. You don't have people in classrooms or teachers in classrooms anymore all the time. You have giant homerooms. Maurice, you were mentioning this. You do sort of part of this in the high flex model where kids are self-studying. They're all moving at pace, but when they hit certain points, it triggers the classroom. That's the Uberization part. Once the classroom is triggered, that cohort moves to the classroom, teacher moves to the classroom, maybe an activities leader, if it's a lab, got an early notification to run ahead and build the science project stuff on the tables at the right time. So then when everybody arrived, they had maybe a half an hour togetherness, and then they're separate. So what this does is essentially make it so that the teachers have office hours, and the teachers are rovers. They're checking all the homerooms for their kids and catching up the ones that are falling behind that haven't made it to the right. They're watching trigger points. Like these kids are not at cohort speed of the first cohort. They're way behind or whatever. So it moves to a much more personalized model. So the things that we look at, and this is just an example of how that auto cohorting is done. So when you're setting a lesson plan together, you would check it's dynamic by cohort arrival, the number of kids who'd have to arrive, if there's a physical location, if there's a meeting link. anyway, it's a lesson step, and then it would auto calendar. So that's new in the market. It's something that a lot of people are interested in because of all the logistics things I was just talking about, and you guys were talking about. Logistics is super hard. Teachers, if you tell them we're going to have AB days and AB weeks, and now it's going to be like 3 days this week and 2 days that week, and you only have this much time now, and you're like, looking at the pacing guide, and then you're over here looking at the what's on your calendar, and you're looking at your whole groups, and you're trying to figure out your lesson plans. That just blew up every teacher in America last year and most of this year so far. So this model, I think, Maurice, is what you said you're doing. You have a traditional schedule model, and then you've carved out parts of one day, or like, and you have 1 day a week, Wednesdays, which is fully virtual, where kids could be in that auto-paced, self-paced, couple hours a day, 1 day a week or something. They could be on remedial in that time, or they could be in extracurricular. It's not your whole traditional math 6th grade, language 6th grade, history 6th grade, but it's time carved out exclusively for self-paced that could then be, like I said, Uberized, which right now is just office hours for most people, most teachers, or it's the chat bots. It's not fully Uberized because the technology isn't completely in every school yet to do that. But this model is the future, is what Learning Council is basically looking at, as saying that model is kind of like the Harry Potter world. You're assigned a house Gryffindor or house Slytherin, and you're in there all the time. If you're in the building, if you're not in the building, you're still a Slytherin, but you're trafficking in from home, kind of a thing. Okay, so now we've talked about all 8 of the models. I think the logistics issue is, in my mind, the heart of the whole issue in the market right now, especially with the rise of like variants. We're watching it's like the Wild West out there. So I want to ask any comments right now about the rest of these models, and then have Wendy sort of talk about what the advances are in the market first. So Anne, I'm coming back to you first. Your thoughts and comments on everything I just said.
Well, I think thank you for giving me an opportunity to comment. I think much of what's written here is what has evolved based on conversations with a number of superintendents. I think you'll find that based on your situation, based on what the beliefs are in your area, based on the available equipment, based on what your parents find practicable, and just based on a lot of nuances, you might find any one of these or more than one of these in place anywhere where we've tried to personalize learning or respond to student needs. I think what will eventually evolve as a menu of options will be based on what we learned during this time period and how flexible people will be to varying the way that we approach student learning. So I can see, based on the size of my group, I probably could go to 2 or 3 places and find any one of these, or maybe 2 or 3 of these. And I think that's what we're going to find. But I think it's nice to lay them out this way so that people can see them.
Yeah. And I think it's also wise, if you have that kind of a roadmap, and you already went to alt schedules, if you're sitting in that, it might be wise for you to map it. What model where? Why? Where are your efficiencies? What are the logistics behind that? Are we having anybody fall through the cracks because we're not a different model here? I think that's the question for a lot of leadership today. considering the environment that we're in. I think it's critical. You've already seen efficiencies, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
So thank you, Ann. Let's go to Maurice. What are your thoughts on this? Because I think you're doing some high flex.
So one of the things that I as it was said, I think it's really important to start kind of capturing these different kind of models and understanding the benefits and the potential drawbacks of each one, because we've had so many, as in Orange County Public Schools, we're such a large district, over 180 schools, that you're going to have all of these methods of experimentation. But if you're going to have any kind of scale, you really need to have something that's more concentrated. I know that our high school office, so our schools are separated into learning communities just because they're just so large. And we have a learning community that basically is only made up of our high schools. And this hybrid high flex is of particular interest to our high school learning community, because they're looking at ways how this can not only provide some of the benefits that are here listed, but also provide almost like that college type scheduling for kids. And so I know that while it's not fully 100% implemented in all high schools, I don't want to give that impression at all. I do know that this is an area of high interest for them, and that they're looking at and starting to work with different principals at different schools to see how they can implement it.
That's awesome. Okay, coming over to you, Tom, and then Wendy, I'd like you to weigh in then on what's happening in the professional scene. Tom, what are your thoughts? Because you have a smaller environment and you're having to do things I don't think Maurice and Ann are having to do yet in terms of just resources.
No, it is interesting, but it's always interesting to listen to Ann and Maurice also. I was one time part of the Guilford County school system in North Carolina, which is the third largest system, about 64,000 kids and 115 schools. Now, I am a school of one. And in New York State, it's a much different environment, because whether we want to talk about the elephant in the room or not, I have the unions to deal with. And they're very strong. They're a very strong part of the education process in New York, whether we want to admit to it or not, but that's okay. I've have a good working relationship with them. But some of the issues are, I love what they do in the South, some of the pieces of the early college and other opportunities for kids, the highly self-motivated students. I'm trying to bring that along, but one of the problems you have in New York is you have to have a New York State certified teacher to teach New York courses. Even in this hybrid model, and I find a great course offered in Florida or California, if that teacher is not reachable by New York State certification, I can't use them as a teacher. So that does create some of the limitations for us, but still at the same time, being part of the block system, opportunities, as one of our colleagues today talked a little bit about, that I was excited about, was the changing of start times. At least when I was going virtual, we could actually, we know what the tendencies are for high school, middle school, but especially high school kids on sleep patterns and starting the day later in the morning versus 7:10. We were able to start our classes at 9:30. Participation was much better and students were more alert. I think this, I hate to say it this way, but you don't want to ever waste a good pandemic. There's great opportunities for us to look outside the box in the way we deliver instruction. But also the pieces, the outcomes. What are the outcomes for kids? Because, some of the things that we're now doing has been going on in the private sector anyway. So now kids are learning how to use technology to do group work and those type of things. So we're trying to prepare real life skills for kids at an earlier level. So I'm excited about it. As much as the limitations are, it still provides opportunities for our kids. I've had a number of courses that my teachers only teach 6 classes. I've got one teaching 8. We do 2 evening courses. One was in cybersecurity, for example. So kids are doing that completely online in the evenings, 7 and 9 o'clock at night. It worked for the teacher. It worked for the kids' schedule. So our kids are actually providing more opportunities in a different modality than you traditionally would. So we're going to run with it the best that we can moving forward.
Well, I think what I'm hearing from all of you is that use of space and time has really flexed in all directions. And it's probably created way more than any of you are saying. Some logistics nightmares, like what course goes at what pattern and blah, 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 blah. I think that's huge. And I just try to think my way through how you do all that. It's like mind-boggling. So Wendy, I'd like you to give us a little bit of an update before we go back to this conversation. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing in the commercial side in response to all of this. You want to take over screen?
Yeah, so Kelley, if you want to screen share. Yeah, I was taking notes as you all were talking, and first of all, I am so thankful that I don't have to do the master schedule at any of your districts, okay? I'm just going to put that out there. So at EdisonLearning, just a little background, we have over 150 courses in grades 6 through 12 that are online. And that includes CTE courses. We have teachers that are serve as a teacher of record from multiple states. So that kind of gives you an idea. We also do content only. So if you wanted your teachers to teach the courses, and that's where I was thinking as we were looking at these models, regardless of which model you use, there are so many different ways that you could use our content. And, I was really thinking, and I know Kelley's going to talk in a minute about how what she's going to go through with you, it could be used in a variety of ways. It could be used as RTI, as that pull-out time as from in the homeroom. It could be used when the children are at home in your 3-2 schedule. It could be used in the classroom as one of your teachers, or it could be something that our teachers are teaching. One of the really cool things that we've added this last year is some of our CTE. We have teach students to fly drones, and they can even get a certification. So we're really trying to focus on connecting students to careers. But I think the biggest thing that is so important to me is that the courses that we offer have solid pedagogy. You can have all the glitz and the glitter and the glam, but if you don't have solid pedagogy, then it's an injustice to the students. So I've really asked Kelley to talk about the Algebra 1 Critical Concepts course and tell you a little bit about the pedagogy that's built into it. And then we can talk about glitz and glam if you want, but I'll turn it over to Kelley.
Yeah, and Kelley, what I like about this before you go into this is that one of the things I'm hearing, I'll just say this as part of the models conversation, is that what was missing a lot last year was a change in actual delivery mechanism online. And I'm seeing your screen right here, and you have something called reteaching. So I hope you talk about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the critical concept courses consist of unique learning objects, and these have the capacity to be flexible in many different learning models. I like to think of these objects as a build your own menu for teachers or anyone using the course. So depending on my classroom model and my learners, I may choose this entire lesson and all of its learning objects, maybe just some of the objects, or even just certain pieces of the objects. So for example, this is a lesson from the Algebra 1 course, and it contains 4 unique learning objects. We have an essential instruction. I'll get into the pieces of it in a minute, and that's like our direct instruction. It contains the majority of info for the concepts. There's also the textbook, which is additional practice problems. And then there's the reteach, which is designed to support learners that need, which is designed for learners that need that additional support. And then we do have an assessment component with both system and teacher graded items to check for mastery. So each of these learning objects were designed using evidence-based teaching strategies. We based it on research from John Hattie and Gagne's 9 events. And depending on your needs, you'll find pieces that offer things like immediate feedback, things that spark interest or motivation for certain concepts, applications, so applying concepts to the real world, and just providing as a ton of practice opportunities as much as we can. So for example, in this essential instruction, it includes a get ready section. And we have a real world application problem here to spark interest. We try to show, depending on the subject area, as much like diversity and a range of interests across the subject areas as we can. This same application is revisited at the end of the lesson, so you can always connect what you started with at the lesson to the end to an actual problem. This object also includes pre and post self-assessments that you could use for students. So we call this in the get set, it's the pre-self-assessment. So this is something a teacher could pass out to students for a self-assessment about necessary prerequisite skills before they start the lesson. Then the go section, which is the bigger piece of this learning object, is great for use in a fully online or a blended environment because it can be used to cover all the direct instruction of a concept or bits and pieces such as certain chunks of info, certain images, or different examples that can be used as supplements to your regular instruction. It also includes practice examples that are aligned to specific objectives. And each of these includes step-by-step solutions. So students are getting some type of feedback as they go along and try to complete the work on their own. In addition to those types of click to reveal examples, we also have storyline activities built in. And the types of activities vary from lessons and in between subject areas, but these are really cool because the interactivity options are really endless. And we really like that it gives you some type of immediate feedback and you can reset, try it infinite times. So it really helps break up text and images that you're used to seeing. And then the other thing I'd like to cover in this object is the think about it section. So this is another piece that I could see being pulled out and using depending on the lesson you're teaching, where in math, we are always trying to focus on those application problems. There's such a big focus. And this section is dedicated to that, to making that application connection. And then I'd just like to quickly cover the remaining learning objects. The textbook is another great resource to use for additional practice. So each problem is aligned to a lesson objective, and then it also contains guided solutions for each practice problem. So you could assign the entire textbook to your students, choose certain problems based on their needs.
Okay, great. Wendy, I want to kind of wrap this up, Wendy and Kelley, and come back from this to the models conversation. So just final comments then from Anne, Maurice, Tom, and Wendy. Thank you, Kelley. On model, now that we've sort of seen what's best in class in the presentment of the journey from Kelley, and obviously there's a lot of other examples out there. I'm going to pick on Edison because from what I've seen, it's a fantastic display. I think logistics in what model you use is highly dependent on what's actually going on in the trenches. Are the teachers just using PDFs and emailing everything around? Are they just posting it somewhere and then you got to go to the link as a student and sort of mess around and open 16 windows and remember all your passwords? What's this look like? And how are you running the attention online and then saving your best time for that human face. Like, Kelley, I can see your cute face right now. So Anne, I want to come back to you on that particular question since they've shared that. What are your thoughts on that next leveling up of the perfection of the digital journey and the human side? Because it's a model question.
Yeah, for me, what we're doing is we're collecting some data from our teachers regarding what they found to be useful. We're collecting data from our parents in terms of what they found to be useful, but most importantly, we're collecting data from our students to find out what they found to be most useful, because they're the end user. What have they found to be most useful? And then what can we do after looking at that data to determine what are the most profitable and effective next steps?
Okay.
We think that that's the way to approach it. We don't want it to be top down. We really want it to be user friendly, and find out what people's comfort level is in terms of moving to the next point.
Smart. I like it. Okay, Maurice, I know you've got OCPS there. You guys got some really advanced stuff. What are your thoughts on that logistics of what it is you use as sort of putting your attention on the perfection of that?
So for us, I immediately thought about our dashboard that we have. So we have a dashboard through a company called Classroom called Launchpad. And on that dashboard, we currently provide rostering information for over 60 different applications to give our teachers and students access to them. And so, we've pushed and we continue to push really hard to make sure that there is an efficient way for a student or a teacher when they start in one system to get to another one, which, is a whole lot more difficult than it may sound. You may start in the learning management system, but then you need to go into the textbook, and then you need to go back into the learning management system, and you need to get something to go into the grade book. And so we've been trying to just piece through those pieces where we can, make connections where we can with our providers of content and resources. I think that piece that was mentioned before about getting folks to understand that the importance of having learning objects, so that you're not just talking about whole collections of things, but you can discreetly present to students what they need. We strongly believe in that. So that's been a big push for us this year.
I like that. So you're already thinking of how you refine and direct attention digitally as perfecting that. I love it. That's very wise. And you guys are really big. So that's going to be a heavy lift for you. Yeah. Good luck, Maurice. Good luck. So, and given what Kelley just showed us and what Wendy was talking about, and systems that actually do that textbook within itself, and a refined direction of attention, obviously that's where everyone's going. All right, so Tom, your thoughts on that logistics piece, which is now into the human interface, but the digital, keeping the eyeballs going the right places.
Well, I have to agree to Maurice, and we're at a much smaller scale, and I remember the buying power the large county systems have, and if he's not being super efficient because they're working through the process, there's a million programs out there. And so one of the issues I have, again, what Maurice is talking about, is the interfacing. And so It's great that we have all these great technology programs, but if they don't interface back to your student management system or your class book to your teachers, it's a bunch of isolations that does not create any flow for your system. That's what we're struggling with right now. And I've put in the contracts that the vendor must provide this or null and void a contract, because if there's not an interface, it doesn't make the work any easier for us. So we take our data and we want to transcend it back into our student information systems, and there's no connectivity to it. It defeats the whole purpose. It's the same thing with some of the things that I brought into the district have been some AI, some artificial intelligence also that brings the most current up-to-date research that the current articles that are happening on a daily basis for kids. For example, the cybersecurity, that our kids were constantly being fed the latest and greatest things that are going on out there in the real world application to bring it back in the classroom. But there's not enough programs that interface it that way. You know, they are going to sell you a system, but the system it's about isolationism and not about integration. And I hope that we move in that direction, that people understand there's enough pieces of the pie in the private sector piece that's going to have the interfacing ability to make us even stronger. Because not one program fits everything perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, and Wendy, your thoughts on that too, because I know you guys are integrated behind a lot of the single sign-ons, but it's that directing attention. I know you're seeing it from a lot of other districts. What are your final comments?
Yeah, I think you can't survive if your systems don't talk to one another. And I think, again, you're very wise to say that, Tom, that they absolutely have to be integrated and those APIs have to talk. Otherwise, you're going to have so many disparate data systems. And I can't imagine, Anne, in a system as large as yours, how if your systems aren't talking to one another and communicating that you could survive. So again, you know, I think the one of the most critical things is not to let the choices in software hamper your options with these different models. I think it is saying, okay, these systems have to do X, Y, and Z so that these models work. And so I admire all three of you. I think all three of you said that in a little bit in different ways. But you absolutely have to be looking for that when you're talking to your software vendors. And then that's one of the things that we certainly do. And I find it extremely important because otherwise you'll lose your data in the process and students get frustrated as they go in and have to have multiple logins. And the student experience is the most important one.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I'll wrap us up now. I don't want to keep everybody all day long. I really think we're at this moment, and I'm going to keep an eye on you, Anne and Maurice and Tom, as to what you're doing. And because what Wendy just said at the end there was commercially, the world and the commercial side is starting from this student experience. And all the discussions of the models, with the exception of hybrid logistics and hybrid high flex, are really looking at it from, 200 years ago, we planned out age by, age grades and whole group classes run by the teacher. And we model ourselves upon the teacher will run everything. Just get enough teachers socked in, and then that's our structure. And I think we're somewhere in the middle of those right now, between what's going on the commercial side, directing attention digitally, and then putting in the teacher with that, and then the other model, which starts with the teacher. We're somewhere between those two worlds right now. So this model conversation isn't going to go away. And I think we've had a lot of epiphanies today that we shared. So I just want to ask everybody one more time, you want to make one last comment, and thank you very much for being with us today. And
thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. Good luck down there in your district. Keep up the good work. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Maurice.
Thank you for this really great discussion. It's great to see that we are really stretched out across here, from Florida all the way up to up north, out there in California. And yet there's so many things that we're all going through that really is the same. So I think that in some ways it's heartening to know that there are others that are out there and potential folks we could reach out to.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to keep the EduJedi together. We got to make sure all you guys are in the EduJedi group. So we'll keep that up. All right, Tom, final comments.
I just want to thank you also for the opportunity and always hear what my colleagues are doing throughout the country, because I think we're different, but yet still the same. We have the same mission on wanting to educate our kids the best that we can. And I appreciate your guys' support and always the things that you put out there. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, thank you for commenting like that. We appreciate that people recognize we are working hard on this stuff, and we're going to keep talking about the model and the structure and what's going on in the consumer world, because we're seeing this mutation, and I think it's going to cause a lot of wild days ahead still. So, Dr. Ann Levett, thank you again so much. Maurice Draggon and Dr. Tom Palmer and Wendy, final words, and then let's all go about our duties in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I would just say thank you all for everything you're doing. Hang in there. That's just going to be a crazy ride, I think, again this year.
All right. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Kelley. Thanks, Wendy. Goodbye, everyone, for now. We'll see you next time. All right. Goodbye.